My name is Agnieszka Graff, and I'm very, very happy to welcome Katha Pollitt. And I have to start with a confession. I'm a long-time fan of your work. I've taught you a piece on Carol Gilligan. I've taught you a piece, actually here, I taught a course where we talked about surrogacy, and we read your article about surrogacy, and I'll be asking you about this, and I'm really excited that you published this book. Apparently the cover is a little radical for Polish public, so we're going to have to make it more sellable today. That's our aim and task. And Katha's way of writing has really been a model for me for years. Katha has a way of examining very carefully both sides of a debate and picking holes in the other side's arguments. And she does it elegantly with wit, and sometimes it's quite funny actually when she remarks on the holes in the other side's argument. And with a kind of empathy, which is, I think, characteristic of this book as well. You start by saying that unlike your mother, you've never had an abortion. And when I read that sentence, I shuddered. Because in Poland, if you start mixing your mother into discussion about abortions, the next thing you say, the next thing that comes in the discussion is usually how you wish you had brothers or sisters, and your argument is completely different. You wish she had told you, so she would have told you about life. Why did you decide to bring your mother into the first sentence of the book?
Well, sorry. That's an interesting question. I think I wanted to have a more personal relationship to the material in the book. I didn't want it to just be abstract, and also, and I didn't want it just to be an argument. I wanted it to feel real. I wanted it to be real. I not only talked about my mother's abortion a little bit in the introduction, which I use as a way to discuss what it was like when abortion was a crime in the United States. Her abortion was, I think, in 1960, and abortion was illegal then. It was completely illegal, but everyone was having them. It's sort of like Poland now. But then, another interesting thing that happened was that more recently I learned that my great-grandmother, who was a Jew in Belarus in World War I, she had an illegal, I don't know if it was legal or illegal, I don't think they had too much law back then during World War I, but she had 9 children, she had an abortion and she died. And she was maybe 40 years old. So this is, abortion goes back so far. And we don't think of it that way in the United States. We think, oh, well, in 1973, the Supreme Court said abortion should be legal in Roe v. Wade, a famous decision. And then everybody started having abortions. So it was like before, no abortion. Now, abortion all the time. Of course, this is completely false. But that's how people think of it. So I wanted to disrupt that by talking about these 2 abortions from ancient history, my own family's ancient history.
I also think, now that I've read the whole book, that this mother's story really ties in with the strategy of this book, which I find works on me. Not that I need any convincing, but it made me feel about the topic strongly again, which is that abortion is something that happens to real women who have friends, and who have women friends, and who have daughters and mothers, and that this is a community thing. One of the arguments that I thought is completely on the spot, but I never thought about it before that way, is that abortion is portrayed as something that a lonely, abandoned woman does all on her own. And we need to save her from this horrible event by giving her a baby so she's not lonely anymore. This is sort of the story that gets told by the anti-abortion side. And we are not going to call them pro-lifers here.
No.
This is one of Katha's, early in the book, she says, no, pro-life is a banned term in our way of talking. It's part of the problem. And so you talk very convincingly about the fact that an abortion is something that happens with the help of friends. It involves friends. And actually, 2 young women that made a film about abortion, illegal abortion, the underground women's world, a few years ago, talk about this, that that the helpers are the ones who are the target of the anti-abortion people, that they are supposed to be penalized, that it's for a good reason that the opponents of choice claim not to want to penalize the woman because they portray her as a victim. They want to, they want to penalize the doctors and the people who take the woman to the abortion. But if you reverse the tables and you say, well, actually, it's a form of giving help to someone you love. And so, going back to your mother, and I thought this was quite moving, you say, well, I wish she had told me. I wish we could have discussed this together. So there's this kind of emotional element in this. Do you think that that's what's missing from our side of the debate, the emotional aspect, that we somehow lost it?
Well, I think that there's some truth to that. I think that the other side, the abortion opponents, as I call them in my book, the abortion opponents are very emotional. It's all about babies and love and doing the right thing, and there's help out. They never say, yes, you're going to have a miserable life, but you have to have the baby. They always say, no, this is going to be hard, but then things will get better. You'll see. You'll have a great life. And if the man doesn't stay with you, who needs him? There's a kind of pseudo-feminism almost to some of it. And I think our side, and I speak here just of America, because I don't know that much about Poland, although there is a chapter about Poland in the book. I think our side, we've relied on the language of rights and the language of health care, but we haven't talked so much about the individual woman. I think that's the piece that kind of got left out, and I think that's come back to haunt us a little bit because it isn't the language of rights is a coldish language, and it goes along with relying a lot on the courts to uphold abortion rights. And as we're seeing, that worked for a while. Now it's not working so well because there are a lot of really right-wing justices on the bench in the United States now. But I wanted to get back to what you said about the idea of the woman being alone.
Drinking Chardonnay. Could you explain this?
Chardonnay keeps I'll get to the Chardonnay in a minute. But the idea, yes, the woman is in crisis. She's desperate. She does this foolish, desperate thing, and we should feel sorry for her. But we shouldn't let her, of course, do that. But actually, in real life, and this was one of the points I wanted to make very strongly in the book, abortion is part of the fabric of American life, and it always has been. That's the thing, whether it was legal or illegal. Abortion has been part of what built America. In 1800, this was fascinating to me. In 1800, American women were having lots of babies. They had an average per capita of 7 children, which is about as much as it's humanly possible for an entire, to have. But by 1900, 100 years later, they were having under 4. They had cut their fertility rate in half without modern methods of birth control. How'd they do that?
Abstinence?
Well, I don't think abstinence. There was some abstinence going on, yes. But I think that the real way they were doing it was with using their very primitive methods of birth control that you don't want to know about. But also abortion. They were having a lot of abortion. They were having abortions before they got married, and they were having abortions after they got married. In fact, I think most women back then who had abortions, they had their children, and then they aborted the later pregnancies. And so the life in America was shaped by abortion. And then, after 1900, the birth rate went down even further until it was like 2 children. And in fact, the birth rate in America has been declining since 1800, continually, except for the 50s, the 1950s and early 60s. That's when, that was their big push, stay home, togetherness, move to the suburbs, have your children, and devote yourself to your family. That was a very brief episode in American life. Except for that, women have wanted to control their fertility a lot. And there was a lot of abortion in the 1950s, too. So, I mean, there's always a lot of abortion. So I wanted to put abortion back both into a social context, a real-life social context, and into the context of women's lives, because it's perfectly true. Most women who have an abortion have someone who helps them. They have a friend, their parent, you know, they have their parents.
Most also have children.
And this is the thing that's amazing. Okay, the two facts that I find, the two statistics that I find people are most surprised to learn in the United States are these. Almost 1 in 3 American women has had an abortion, at least one abortion in her fertile years. And what does that do? That disrupts the whole picture that abortion is this kind of rare thing. It's these, you know, just a handful of desperate women. Normal women don't do this. No one you know has done this. 1 in 3, that's a lot. And here in Poland, I understand it's 1 in 4, which is also a lot. The second statistic is that 61% of women who have abortions already have children. And this disrupts the commonplace stereotype that women who have abortions hate children. They don't want to have children. They want to have their cold-hearted career lives.
And Chardonnay.
And Chardonnay.
What's
and
up with Chardonnay?
I'm going to tell you about that. Just let me finish my sentence. Or they're sluts. They just, you know, they just want to have a lot of sex. But the truth is that most women who have abortions already have children. They know what having a baby is like. They know what they can deal with in their own lives. They know what their resources are. And they're making a rational decision. About Chardonnay, which I think I only mentioned once in the book. I'm taking off from a piece that Naomi Wolf wrote. You're probably all familiar with her. So Naomi Wolf in the early 90s wrote a piece in the New Republic, which was then reprinted in the New Statesman. And it was about how women should feel guilty about having abortions, that women really are fetal vessels in some way. And it really is a terrible, immoral thing to have an abortion. I mean, you might have to do it, but you should feel really bad. That's very important, feeling bad. And the example she gives of, you know, your typical abortion-seeking woman is a friend of hers who couldn't be bothered to use birth control because she was happy, you know, it was such good Chardonnay, so she couldn't be bothered to put in her diaphragm or make him wear a condom or whatever. So I was so horrified by that. I mean, because it's who has an abortion? An upper class, frivolous, privileged, drunken slut, basically. Her friend, not very nice. That was what the Chardonnay reference was.
Okay, the core argument of your book is that people who say that this is about life are not only wrong, but they also don't really believe what they say, or they don't really believe it, except maybe for the 8% of religious fanatics who do. And you spend a lot of time explaining why this view that there's human personhood from the earliest stages, from conception, is really a completely fake view. My favorite example, I think, comes from my favorite argument in the book comes from a book, I think, by Dworkin. It's about the firemen. I actually laughed reading that. That if we imagined a fire in a fertility clinic and pro-life or self-proclaimed pro-life fireman who fails to save human beings, including a 5-year-old girl, but saves 30 embryos. What would we say to this, right? And basically you and Dworkin argue that we would think he's crazy, that we actually value the 5-year-old girl more than the 30 embryos. And even the self-proclaimed pro-lifers would agree with us.
Not all of them.
But most of them, you say, right?
Robert George, I don't know if his name is familiar to you, he's the eminence grise of American conservatism. He's a very powerful academic based in Princeton, and he's totally anti-abortion. But he wrote a whole book called Embryo, in which he never discusses abortion at all. It's all about in vitro fertilization and stem cell research. It's a very clever strategy. And he tries to establish, yes, even
That it's immoral.
It's immoral, it's terrible, it's just like murder. And he says of this example of the person, the fireman in the abortion clinic, in the fertility clinic. Well, wait a minute. If it was his embryos, you could really understand it. Yes, I had to rescue
So much
my children.
for universal.
Right. I had to rescue my children, so I let those other people die. So, there is just no end to the kinds of philosophical nonsense you can get up to once you accept the idea that a fertilized egg is a person just like you sitting here. I mean, if you would barely fit into one little compartment in a freezer and in a fertility clinic.
Okay, but wouldn't you allow some value, some humanity? I mean, there are people who, your book makes a very strong and I would say radically feminist claim against the equivocation of the pro-choice side, where the sort of Naomi Wolf and maybe to the left of Naomi Wolf, in other words, people who say, well, abortion should be legal, but we agree that it's a bad thing, and so let's limit it somewhat, let's make sure that women think about it, let's increase the availability of contraception. In other words, why is it that you are worried about the equivocation, about the gray area where most people would actually locate their views, where they say, well, it's not quite a person, but almost, and therefore it deserves protection? You have a pretty radical attitude. Like reading your book sometimes feels like rereading, late 60s radical statements for abortion on demand.
Well,
I completely share in that view, but that is a view shared by about 10% of the population. We are in the minority.
No.
So why not allow the gray area? Why not, scoop them up?
Well, the gray area is fine in the sense that we all have very complicated thoughts in our head and complicated feelings too that are very situation dependent. Right, but once you start talking about the personhood of the fetus, you forget that it's situation dependent. You forget that if it's your daughter, you would want her to have an abortion. But if it's someone else's daughter, maybe not. It's very hard to transfer feelings to law. And that's the big mistake, I think, that happens, is that a lot of people, they do feel, abortion, it's not so good. And then they start saying things that you just said. What they don't say so much is, we need a lot of birth control, which is what I would say. I mean, why put a woman through an abortion when she should be having birth control? But the people who want to make abortion harder to get usually want to make, at least in America, they want to make birth control harder to get too, and we see this going on in my country all the time. We're fighting against birth control being paid for under Obamacare.
Okay, but that's the easy argument.
Okay.
I think you can do better than that.
I'm going to do better.
How would you respond to a person who says, let's limit abortion and increase the availability of contraception?
Because I think that limiting abortion means let's have a legal abortion. I have a chapter in the book about, compromise. People want compromise. What would be a good compromise? And one of the ones that is often proposed in the United States is what you have here, which is let's have abortion be legal if it's the life of the mother, if it's a terribly damaged fetus, if it's rape or incest. So I'm saying, so if you have voluntary sex, then you have to have the baby. Now, why is that? What that's really saying is that you don't have the right to have voluntary sex without having this potentially quite disastrous consequence. And I would say that if you really believe it's a person from the moment of conception, you can't make those exceptions. I think the Catholic Church is right about that. that if you really believe it's a person, what difference does it make how it was conceived? That doesn't make sense. What difference, if it's sick, you can't go kill a person because they're sick. I can't go to the hospital and say, well, you're going to die anyway. So why should I be able to do that? Why should you be able to do that to the fetus? Make the woman have the baby, and then she can hold it, and 9 days later it dies. It's in a recent famous case here. It's had that 9 days of life. And I think that even with the mother's, the question of the mother's health, as Pope Francis said in another context, who am I to judge? In Ireland, they let Savita Halappanavar die because her unviable fetus still had a heartbeat. And they would not perform a miscarriage until that unviable fetus that was going to die anyway was dead. And that's what happens when you make these restrictions that sound reasonable. Meanwhile, as in Poland, everybody else would be having their illegal abortions. And that's why we had Roe v. Wade in the first place. See, this is the thing, everything gets back to, oh, let's have it be when abortion was illegal.
And you basically argue that the people who want abortion to be illegal are using the personhood of the fetus as a smokescreen for what they really want, and what they really want is enslavement of women. I'm using old-fashioned words. You would say the return of conservative family morals.
Yes.
And it's a kind of egg and hen situation, I'm thinking. Because a person, and I know people like this, who actually values gender equality, but also feels very strongly that abortion is evil, would tell you, well, gender equality is great, but it has to be limited in that one special area because human life begins at conception. In other words, they want to have it both ways, and they think that you can limit abortion or ban abortion without really interfering with equality. What you're saying is that the core, the political core, the ideological core of the desire to limit abortion is a kind of is a misogynistic view of women as devoted to childbearing as their main cause in life, as that to which they are really dedicated. And you also argue, and I thought this was really interesting, that that when abortion became legal, this actually gave women a sense of that they own their lives, that they have the right to live their lives as they wish. In other words, abortion to you is not just a kind of difficult problem within an otherwise equal world. It is the core battleground. It is that place where by deciding whether abortion is legal or illegal in a given society, we are really deciding what we think of women. We are expressing what we think of women, and therefore this debate is not going to go away. It seems to me that it's with some impatience that you report that the Polish women's movement has given up on this issue, and we can discuss this. I can maybe tell you why we did or how it happened, or maybe it didn't happen completely. But do you really think that it is at the center, even today, with pharmaceutical abortion, with modern contraception, that it is such a core issue?
Yes, I do. I think that if women are legally compelled to become mothers whenever they get pregnant, whenever that is, if they're 12, if they're 45, if they have too many children already, if they're in school, if it means they have to drop out of their career, yes, you're saying the rest of your life just doesn't matter all that much. What really matters is that you give birth. If you really don't want the kid, you can give it up for adoption. That's what they always say, as if that's nothing. So just be a baby machine and then, get back to your life. So yeah, I think that is what it's saying. We would never make these demands of men. It's just incredible to me. We would never allow a man's life to be derailed by...
Can I read a fragment?
Yes, please.
I'm going to read it in Polish because I have the Polish edition here. I laughed when I read this and I thought it was just wonderful. Nie oczekujemy przecież, że mężczyzna, który przypadkowo zapłodni kobietę, rzuci wszystko, zrezygnuje z marzeń i zgodzi się na życie pełne trudów, by współuczestniczyć w wychowaniu dziecka. Niestety, młody człowieku, nie ci ze studiów, ale może ci się uda załapać na jakieś kursy, kiedy dziecko pójdzie już do szkoły. Jeśli kobieta zechce oddać dziecko do adopcji, nie będziemy nękać i poniżać biologicznego ojca z powodu niechęci do przyjęcia dziecka i zachowania go w rodzinie pochodzenia. Nie ma nawet prawnego obowiązku, by mężczyzna, który zapłodnił kobietę, zapewnił jej wsparcie finansowe na czas ciąży i porodu, mimo że brak pieniędzy to jeden z powodów decydowania się na aborcję, a stres w ciąży to znacząca przyczyna poronień i przedwczesnych porodów. Basically what you're saying is that because the responsibility of childbirth is with the woman, even in the rare cases of giving up the child for adoption, this really is at the core the issue of what we think of women.
Yeah.
But some people would actually respond to that by saying, well, but that's because we live in a society that has excluded men from the right to parent. And there is a strong men's movement in Poland, maybe not all that strong, but strong enough to be a problem for some of us. And they basically say, well, we want the right to choose too. The partner of a pregnant woman should have the right to choose. If we talk about choice, give us some choice too. How would you respond to them? Which is, if I impregnated a woman, me being the man, I would want the right to decide.
Wait, you would want the right to decide whether she can have an abortion? Yeah. Well,
I mean, I'm not saying this, I'm playing devil's
Right, no, I
advocate.
understand.
We wouldn't have a
I understand.
conversation if
I
I wasn't
understand
doing
because
that.
there's another thing that men's rights activists say, which is that they should have the right not to pay child support if they didn't agree to have a baby. But we're talking about this other argument. Well, look, there are two people involved in making this pregnancy, but only one person is pregnant. Only one person gives birth and assumes all the physical risks of that, and is responsible, and all the rest of it. And somebody has to win that argument, and it should be her. I mean, what did he do? He had an ejaculation. What did she do? 9 months, risking her life and health in pregnancy and childbirth. There's just no comparison. Until the child, if he's so interested in having a baby, he should find a woman who wants to have a baby with him.
But you see, this is what we would have said in the 1970s.
Well, we were right then.
We were right, I completely agree. I'm a second wave feminist. But since then, one thing has happened to the culture which I think is quite astonishing and scary in some ways, which is, I call it the DNA fetishism.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the rise of reproductive technology. And the fact, for instance, you mentioned surrogacy only once in your book, in a very interesting context, but you've written a big anti-surrogacy article elsewhere. And I would be really curious what you think about surrogacy now. But what you argue here, and this is bringing in Mitt Romney Tag, who is...
Oh yeah, his son.
His son, yeah. Mitt Romney is was
Right.
right-wing politician, very strong position against abortion. He ran for presidency on a very strong anti-abortion agenda. And yet his son, if I understand, had a contract with a surrogate mother in which he guaranteed himself the right to demand an abortion if that fetus, his fetus, is wrong in some way, in some medical way.
Yes.
So there is a claim, I think there much more so today than in the 70s when this debate was at the, at the stage where we really wanted to be, right? A kind of moral, principled stand on both sides. Now there's this ownership thing. There's this, it's my fetus, even in that fireman story, right? If it's somebody else's embryos, let them die. But if it's my embryo, I want to save them because they're human life. Do you think that the debates over reproductive technologies and in general the progress in medicine has influenced the abortion debate?
Well, what a fascinating question. I want to just say that contract would not be legal. You cannot, that surrogate, if TAG had said, okay, this fetus has this serious genetic problem, it's time for the abortion, and she said, no, I don't want to do that, there is not a judge in America that would say, yes, you have to have an abortion. It would be completely illegal. That contract is basically illegal.
Is it because the judges are likely
No,
to
it's
be
because-
anti-choice, or
no.
because they cannot limit the woman's right to her
That's
body?
right, it's her privacy right. You cannot force a woman to have an abortion, no matter what contract she signs. And that was probably this kind of boilerplate that's just in there, and that was it's not upholdable in law. But your larger question is fascinating because, okay, now everybody talks about DNA, but 50 years ago, was it about then? We didn't even know DNA existed. Then people talked about the soul. The DNA is just the modern version of the soul, it seems to me. That there's this idea that there has to be this essence that is you. I've never really understood what a soul is, but we all know what DNA is. And we have this idea, you are your DNA, but in fact you're not your DNA. The idea that, your DNA determines everything about you is a very popular idea. And we love it when there are stories of two identical twins, and they've been separated for years, and then they meet, and it turns out they both like tea without sugar. They both have cats. They both named their daughter Elizabeth. And people think, oh my God, yes, it's destiny. But about every person, there are around 1 million facts. And if you put any two people together, they would have some facts in common. And that's really what it is. But anyway, yeah, the DNA is now the be-all and end-all of what being a person is. And I think we have to resist that, because it isn't true. Your environment is very important. What qualities that you possess inherently are potential. If Mozart were growing up as a shepherd in Yemen, he wouldn't be Mozart. In fact, he wouldn't be Mozart if he were born today. I mean, he might be doing something very brilliant, but he wouldn't be writing Don Giovanni. So I think that DNA has become this way, yes, of reinstating the personhood claim of the fertilized egg. Yes.
Okay, I've tapped Katha the philosopher, but I'm really yearning for Katha the radical feminist.
Okay.
And it seems to me, maybe you're not making this argument, but I think in the background of your book there is this argument that people who oppose abortion really think of women as containers for an essence, which anti-abortion people call humanity, but what they really mean is male property. What they really mean is that the man put something there and it better survive, and the woman is responsible for that thing's survival. And I hear that argument whenever I hear the men's right to choose thing, that, that thing there is, they call it human, but what they really mean, it's mine. Possibly it's my son, he's gonna look like me. Yeah. And so it's this DNA fetishism has a very strong...
That's an interesting point, and maybe you're more radical than me.
I'm sure I am.
Because what I think of that men's right argument as something that anti-abortion people use tactically. Because if the man says, hey, it's my DNA and I want you to have an abortion, they wouldn't say, oh yeah, well okay, you have the right to do that. They're only interested in it when it comes out in their favor. And they'll use any argument. For example, they're very much in favor now of single motherhood. It's funny because they're very conservative, socially very conservative, and they're all for marriage and women devoting themselves to the home and being submissive to their husbands and all the rest of it. And it's, the two big religions that are anti-choice are the Catholic Church, which is a complete patriarchy. No woman has any power there. And except, the Pope's housekeeper, as the Pope likes to say, and the evangelical fundamentalist Protestantism, which has an explicit ideology of women being submissive to their husbands. Nonetheless, because they're anti-abortion, they have to say, oh, you're going to be a single mother. You'll see, it'll all work out. This is so wonderful. You're going to have a baby. So it's a very funny contradiction because what really matters to them, I have to say, I really think they're pretty single-minded. That if it means no abortion, they're for it. And if it means the woman gets to choose, they're against it. So if a woman came to them and said, you know, I really don't want to be a single mother, I feel I should be married and submissive to my husband, they will just say, well, that will come, darling. That'll happen for you, but have the baby.
Well, now you're saying something that you seem to be opposing in the book, which is that what they really want is no abortion. But in the book, again and again, you say, when they say no abortion, they really mean no sexuality for women.
Yes.
They mean no freedom for
Yes.
women. Sooner or later, it always comes down that the desire to ban abortion is always about sex and
Absolutely, it's really true. But once you're pregnant, the calculus changes while you're pregnant. Once you're pregnant, if you go to a crisis pregnancy center, which are religious faith clinics that are supported in many states by the government, they will tell you whatever they have to tell you not to have an abortion. They'll tell you, oh, well, you don't need to have an abortion. You know, a lot of women have miscarriages, so you can wait. They'll say that. They'll just say whatever. They'll say there's all kinds of help out there for you. We're going to help you once you have the baby. And then you have the baby and there's no help for you. They're completely situational in their ethical approach to pregnancy.
They're saving lives. It is internally.
That's what, yes. They think whatever it takes to save a life. But they're lying a lot of the time to women. And they've gotten in trouble for that in some states. But yeah, basically, they don't want you to have sex outside of marriage. And whether or not you're married, if you do get pregnant, you have to have the baby. I'll tell you a funny story. I was on the radio in Minneapolis with a Catholic law professor, Catholic law professor. And among the first things, of course, she hated my book. She told the audience, had to tell the audience that. Thanks a lot. And she says, well, and I'm talking about, you know, birth control failure and how it's not so easy to get birth control, blah, blah, blah. She says, no, that's not why women have abortions. Women have abortions because they have no self-control. And I said, well, what about married women? They're supposed to have sex with their husband. And she says, married women don't have abortions. Immediately, 3 women called up the station and said, you know, we had abortions when we were married. So this is how they think. There's the thing I find most frustrating, if I could just say something, is what do you do when people have different facts? They just don't accept the things that we think are true. For example, they don't think birth control works. They argue that birth control doesn't work. They don't think condoms work.
They also believe that birth control causes cancer and infertility.
Yes, birth control causes cancer, abortion causes mental illness and cancer. They have a whole bunch of different facts that they're operating on. They think everyone regrets their abortion. And in fact, studies show that very few women regret their abortion, either right after or 3 years later. Most women really feel it was the right decision for them. So they're just operating with a whole kind of their own pseudoscience. And this I find very disturbing because most people are not really able to tell good science from bad science. I mean, I can look at these studies that they'll show and I say, wait, you ask a lot of anti-abortion women if they're sorry they had an abortion. Well, yeah, if you're against abortion, you think you killed someone and you've committed murder, then you're probably not going to feel too good about it, especially 10 years later when you've revised the whole experience in your mind in accord with your philosophy, and you've sort of forgotten how important it was for you at that time to have that abortion. But most people can't look at these studies and see that. They'll just think, oh yeah, right, regret.
The most interesting mystification or just plain lie that you unmask, and this is one that I actually believed, so I suspect a lot of people in this room will also have believed in it, is that the ultrasonograph, the scientific, technological progress thing, changed women's attitudes towards abortion. And that there is this statistic, and I think I must have read it somewhere and accepted it as true, that once a woman has seen the image on the screen of her pregnancy, she's very likely not to have the abortion. Well, you show how this myth was created and that it's untrue, and that the source from which it allegedly came said, well, we never really published this, and that in fact 96% or 98% of women never changed their mind after seeing the image. And also, if you take into account the fact that most women who have abortions have already had babies, they've already seen such an image, so it's irrelevant. So this capacity to fabricate facts is really a big part of the anti-abortion movement. They do it all the time, of course, all for a good cause. They're saving lives, right?
Right, but what's disturbing, particularly, and this is what I talk about a lot in the book, is that these falsehoods are accepted in the mainstream, especially in the mainstream media, because people have this idea, oh yeah, abortion, yeah, it's really a terrible thing, and probably if you look at a sonogram, you're not going to have an abortion. I mean, this was published in the New York Times. So I think that my book is really aimed at people that are kind of in the middle. You know, so they might think it's okay to have an abortion under these circumstances, but not these other circumstances. And of course, they imagine they're going to make the decision. And it just occurred to me, this is a little like people who think, yeah, I'm for freedom of speech, but you know you can go too far, right? I'm not for people being able to say this or say that. And they always imagine they're going to be up on a throne deciding, right? This movie is pornography and that movie is art. But it isn't going to be them. It's going to be a whole other bunch of people, politicians on the make, clergymen, you know, conservative busybodies. And abortion is the same. That if you imagine, yeah, I'm going to be there saying, you know, you should have the baby, you can have an abortion. It's not the way it works. It's going to be some priest who decides, you know, some anti-choice doctor who decides. And I think that's not a good situation. And I think the best way of making this decision is for the woman to make it herself.
So do you agree with Lucinda Sisler's provocation? Would you have an empty piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, as the best abortion law?
Well, we have to explain what that is. Lucinda Sisler was a radical feminist in the late 60s, and she was the guiding spirit in New York against the then quite strict anti-abortion laws. She regarded Roe v. Wade as a defeat because it set boundaries. It said you can have an abortion in the first 2 months of first 2 trimesters of pregnancy, and not afterwards, except to preserve your life or health. It also gave, Roe v. Wade is mostly about the right of doctors to take, it's sort of funny, it's mostly about the right of doctors to take care of their patients. So when, at a meeting, when she was asked, what should the ideal abortion law be, she held up a piece of paper and it was blank. And I think that is not, I think that is the ideal. Abortion should be treated like other medical, it should not be in the criminal law at all. It should be treated like other medical procedures and governed that way, like a heart transplant or prescription regimes, all that sort of thing. It does not belong in the criminal code. But decades and decades after Lucinda Sisler held up that piece of paper, abortion is still in the criminal law of New York State. A very liberal state, a very pro-choice state. It's amazing. It's very, very hard for people not to say, yeah, there ought to be conditions under which women should be forced to have children. That's really what it boils down to. That seems wrong to me.
Isn't there a moment in pregnancy, here's the anti-abortionist waking up in me, isn't there a moment in the pregnancy where even you would agree that it should be illegal, or at least limited to extreme situations, viability in other words?
I think that Roe v. Wade is a very good compromise. I think that the Supreme Court got it right. I think that there is a point in pregnancy when most people would feel, yeah, now the baby kind of has some rights here. You've missed your moment, lady. And I think that as long as her life and health are protected in other extreme situations, that's as good as it's going to get. Now, I know abortion providers who perform abortions later than 24 weeks. There are about 4 clinics in the United States that will do it. You have to go. So if you need this service and you're in New Jersey, you can go to Maryland, or you can go to Boulder, Colorado, or you can go to New Mexico. And that's kind of it. And that seems to me that it's pretty controlled. If you can get yourself all the way to New Mexico for an abortion, because let's say you are a teenager and you were in complete denial about your pregnancy, you did not realize that you were pregnant. And I have met women like this. They really didn't know, because they didn't know what was going on in their bodies. I took a woman to an abortion clinic, and it's a long story, and she did end up having the baby, and that was fine. She found out she was pregnant because she had a terrible stomachache, and she went to the emergency room, and I asked her, and they told her, well, you're pregnant. She was 23 weeks pregnant. I said to her, well, what did you think was going on in there? And she said, well, I was in Bangladesh last summer. This is now the spring that we're talking about. I was in Bangladesh last summer, and I thought, well, maybe I had food poisoning. Now the truth about this woman is that she was a very, very overprotected young woman who knew nothing about sex. She had had sex like once or twice with a man she became her boyfriend after her car broke down and he stopped to fix a tire. It's one of these stories, and she really had no idea what was going on. Now, if that woman she did end up backing out of this last-minute abortion. She was going to have an abortion on the very last day. It would have been legal in New York State. And in the end, she decided not to do it. And that was fine. And I think it turned out well for her. But if she had wanted to have an abortion and she had gone to New Mexico, would we want to say, no, you've got to have that baby. I'm sorry, you were just too ignorant. You just didn't know what was going on. You were in denial. Too bad for you. I don't think so. I think it would be very hard to say no to her.
Okay. On the other hand, those late-term abortions have become a major strategy of argument for the anti-abortion camp.
It's
to say
true.
that they take the late-term abortion and they work back from there.
Yes. Now, how many? It's very interesting because, what percentage of abortions in America would you say happen after the 20th week? We're still talking about a fetus that is not viable. After the 20th week, it's 1.5%. After viability, it is a tiny number. It's like 2,000 or something like that. But the anti-choice movement has managed to make that seem like the typical abortion. The typical abortion is not even a fetus yet, it's an embryo. It's that 90% of abortions are in the first trimester. So what I see there is I see women trying to deal with this situation as quickly as they can. And what makes that hard to do? What makes that hard to do is they have to come up with the money. And, abortions are disproportionately had by poor women. To raise that money is not easy. And then they're chasing the money, and they have to get to the clinic, and they have to make all the arrangements. That's not easy it's easy in New York State, but it's not easy in New York City, but it's not easy in much of the country. And I would say if we're really concerned about late-term abortions, then what we should do is make it very easy to have an abortion earlier. After the birth control that we're going to give everybody.
But of course, that is one of the side effects of the anti-abortion movement, as well as of the illegality of abortion in Poland, is that we have proportionally far more late-term abortions.
Yes,
because
exactly.
the effect of delay, of waiting, of all those obstacles
Well,
that the antis
the more clinics are closed down, which is happening all over not all over the country, but in certain parts of the country in America, the harder it is to get an appointment. People don't think about these practical things. So in Texas now, where more than half the clinics have closed, and there's like a huge swath of Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, where there are no clinics. The average waiting time for an appointment is like 10 more days or 20 more days. well, that could put you over easily. So I think that it's in ways like this that you see that the anti-choice movement is not about what it appears to be about.
So what is it really about?
Well, it's really about the stuff you're talking about. It's really about pushing women down, pushing women back, and it's also a reaction to sex, to sexual liberation. I think that's a big piece of it. I think there's a religious reaction all over the world now. You know, the same thing that in Iran women have to wear a big raincoat when they go out in a hijab. It's the same thing as in America, where you can't have an abortion. It's that you women, you don't know what's good for you. We have to make you knuckle under. You have to be under the control of the family, of men, of some clergy person, some imam or priest. It's the same thing. It just takes different forms. And so...
Kazimierza Sztuka, who wrote a wonderful, very moving and very intelligent book about abortion called Silence of the Little Lambs, incidentally, years ago. And I don't know if this argument is in the book or whether she said it publicly, is that she has the suspicion that all those men who speak against abortion with such feeling are actually performing, maybe unconsciously, this emotional transfer onto the fetus. In other words, they identify with the fetus. There's this, the man, the bishop, the right-wing politician is actually identifying with this helpless being who needs to be cared for. And the more the world seems like a dangerous place, the more of this anxiety is kind of projected onto women. Take care of us. Be unconditionally loving. There's this kind of emotional, sentimental investment going on. And that, the more out of hinge the world becomes, the more we want women to be there for us, to be eternally loving providers. And they will survive, and even if they're single mothers, and they will be happy to have the children. That it's really a fantasy of, the womb that will take us in. This is getting out a little bit out of hand. It's just basically, Kasia Sztuka uses psychoanalytic ideas in this argument, but you make a more politically grounded argument, which is that radical right-wing, that the new right with its obsession about abortion is actually a product of neoliberalism to some extent, or a reaction to the rise of neoliberalism. The more people's lives, real economic lives, are out of balance, the more anxious they are about where the next month's rent is coming, the more they want stability, and they seek this stability in a kind of imaginary, stable, traditional world with a religious sanction. So, I share this view. I actually think that these two things are connected, both on the local level, where, for instance, mega churches become the providers of of childcare, maybe not healthcare, but certainly childcare and and housing, and they do a lot of the things that the state has failed to do in the last few decades, but also on a more global level. The people seek solace, and if you think of where solace is coming from, it tends to be this kind of warm, soft thing, and it's more like a woman than like a teddy bear. So that's maybe where we're heading.
But what's so fascinating about that, I think there's a lot of truth in what you say, is that people could say, I want a warm, soft thing that will take care of me. I want the government to help take care of me.
Well, that was
but they
my next question.
Yeah,
Why
they don't say that. They say, I want some woman to have some baby she can't take care of it, some kind of displaced, feeling that I have. I mean, it's really kind of nuts. But yeah, it's very interesting that people are not around, well, in some places they are, in Spain they are, I mean, in Greece they tried that a little bit. But it's very interesting that the harder life gets, the more precarious life gets, the more right-wing people become. I don't think I really understand that. But you see, for example, in the United States, I mean, it's amazing. Not to be all American imperialists, but the American Republican campaign is fascinating. I think you'd all really enjoy following it if you're not already. Because who are the top candidates? The top candidates, right, Trump and Carson, they have between them, they have 50% of the Republican vote. These are people who have never held any political office. They're both completely nuts in their very different ways. They're sort of weird. People love them. I don't understand this. I mean, I can understand a little bit with Trump. I think, well, he made a lot of money. Maybe he'll help me make some money. Not that he's ever done that. But it's totally wild. It's like they have given up on the political class entirely. They don't like any of the normal candidates, the political candidates, and which is amazing. They even like Carly Fiorina, who's really horrible, for about 15 minutes. They thought, okay, her, she'd be okay. She's never held office. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I like her. And I think it is about feeling it's about feeling adrift. It's about feeling, well, the political class is doing nothing for me, so let's try these other people. Why not? And they don't take it any farther than that, I think. Why don't people say, well, some people do, say, Bernie Sanders, he sounds good, he's kind of a socialist. There are people that, he's doing well in the Democratic polls, but that's just the Democrats.
It's just Vermont.
Well, no, he's elected from Vermont, but he's actually doing pretty well in the polls. And Hillary Clinton has had to move further to the left because of him, which is good. But why is it that in country after country after country, the turn is to religion, the turn is to taking away women's rights, the turn is to becoming a big xenophobe and racist? It's a little discouraging.
On a more optimistic note, the Supreme Court has just made its timely decision about gay marriage. And
yes.
Why did this happen?
Well, this is fascinating.
And why? But
Yeah.
I see we have this ritual discussion in Poland. We've had it since the early 90s, which is what will come first? Will the church relent on abortion, or will it relent on gay marriage? And that debate is still going on because it has relented on neither. But it seems that there is more space, there is more elbow room for gay marriage, actually, or for at least some tolerance for gay identity within the Catholic circles than there was in the 90s. And on abortion, there's no movement at all. And I think this is even more pronounced in the United States. Gay marriage is in, and you have Republican politicians rooting for it, and and there's actually a very broad support for it. 80% of the American population supports gay marriage. Unthinkable even 10 years ago. And yet on abortion, as your book documents, it's a different strategy than in Poland, by the way. You draw a lot of interesting parallels between Poland and the States, but there is a big difference. In Poland, they have just filed yet another bill with several 100,000 signatures, which is a ban on abortion in all possible cases. They don't waste their time trying to limit, to introduce little difficulties for women who want abortions. They basically go all the way. And it may be just the fact that Poland is more conservative and they have more support, but it may be a difference of strategy. We could discuss this also. But how do you understand the progress in gay rights happening at the same time as there is regress in abortion rights?
Well, this is a fascinating question, and I wrote a column about this. And I think there are a number of reasons. And one is marriage is an essentially conservative institution, which says I want to be faithful, I want to be part of the community, I want to build a life as a hopefully bourgeois citizen, and it's about love. It's interesting, when same-sex marriage was fought for in the United States, the first arguments were things like, I want certain rights, I want to inherit, and in fact the case that overturned, one of the prime cases that overturned anti-gay marriage laws was a case involving inheritance. So that's, they made that kind of case. And that might have worked with lawyers, but it didn't really resonate with people. It was when they started talking about love that people started thinking, yes, why can't these people show their love the way I, a heterosexual person, can show my love? Abortion is about something else. Abortion is about women, it was not a denial of love. It might be an affirmation of love. If you have one child and you're devoting everything you have to that child and you can't afford another, you might be getting an abortion because you love that first child and want to give them everything they need. There are all kinds of reasons why. Or you might not be wanting to have that child because you're with an abusive man and hope to escape him and have a child that will have a decent father. There are all kinds of reasons that it related to love that women have abortions. But abortion at its core is about women's autonomy, women being able to make this decision, women being able to decide. People don't think women should be able to decide. America was not able to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. People don't support it, it couldn't get through. So I would say that a wonderful Irish journalist said to me, yes, same-sex marriage, it's about love. This was after they had their vote. The first country in the world to institute same-sex marriage by a referendum was Ireland, and which shows you how quickly things can change because they're very, have a whole oppressive Catholic history that they're getting rid of very quickly. And she said to me, we have to think of a way to make abortion be about love. And I think that's a test.
But do you think we should, or do you think we should actually insist that it's about autonomy?
Well, it can be about
because,
both.
and I'm going to have my one little pet difference with you. I actually think it is about denial of love. I think it is about the refusal of the woman to invest emotionally in the embryo which is developing in her body and say, this is my child. That moment, I was very interested in the ultrasonograph story that you give, where a conservative politician says that once he and his wife saw the ultrasonograph image, they knew it was life, they knew it was their daughter, and they called it a little bean, and then after she was born, they still call her little bean. And he goes on about there's a kind of continuity between the fetus, the embryo, the fetus, and the child in the mind of someone who loves, who wants to have the child. Well, if you don't want to have the child, you don't build that continuity. You don't talk to your unwanted pregnancy. On the other hand, infertile women will talk to their frozen embryos, but that doesn't make them human beings, right?
Well,
and so the issue maybe at the core, and I'm going to get a little psychology in here, is whether that our societies are at the core patriarchal more than they are homophobic. Homophobia may be a little thing, and misogyny is really deep. And here is the radical feminist speaking. I read a lot of radical 69 feminists, and I actually think they've got a point. Patriarchal societies are unable to accept the fact that a woman is not giving all the time. That a woman has a moment when she says, well, no, I don't love this person, I don't love this child, I don't love this embryo, I'm not going to have this child. It's this kind of no thing. That's what autonomy is all about in the end, no?
Well, I just think that...
But of course, if we want to strategically say that it's about love, I'm willing to erase this.
I think that, look, I think people have all kinds of feelings. I read a wonderful book by Leslie Cannell, the name of which, who's an Australian bioethicist, and she interviewed a lot of women who'd had abortions, and a lot of them did talk in terms of love. They talked about what they felt they could give to a child, and it wasn't enough, and it was a loving decision not to have that child. It doesn't have to be, no, get out of here. I think for some women it is, no, get out of here. But I think that there are all different reasons why people decide not to carry a child to term. But think of it this way. We would never say, oh, you're using birth control. That's a refusal to love.
Oh, we would. I
You
mean,
would?
we, the
No, not
Polish
you.
clergy, we would.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say that.
No, I wouldn't.
So you would say once you're pregnant, you're denying something that you're not denying if you wear an IUD. See, I would just challenge that.
But I would basically say there's a difference between sex, protected sex, and a pregnancy. A pregnancy is a reality. It is the potential child, which you're saying,
Yeah.
no, I won't let this child develop its potential.
Right.
Right?
You are saying that. But you can still, I think you're giving too much personhood to this fertilized egg, basically.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I think you are. I think you are. And I think that I would just say, part of the book is that we talk obsessively about women's feelings. And I feel we learn to do this in a way we don't talk about men's feelings. We talk obsessively about women's feelings, and we love to judge them and parse them and get very, into the nitty-gritty of them. And I think we learn to do this from reality television, from the way women talk to each other. It's obsessive rumination over every little tiny little detail, who said what, and all like that. We don't do this with men. And we don't do this with the law. And my book is a lot about what should the law be? What should social policy be? If every woman who had an abortion felt, well, I killed my baby, but the law stayed the same and social policy stayed the same, people can have whatever feelings they want. But it's only with women, in my view, people should have whatever feelings they want, but it's only with women that we make the argument, well, people have these feelings, and therefore that should determine what the law and social policy should be. Regardless of, well, here's what happens when you have an unwanted child, it's not so great. Isn't that more important? What happens if you have this baby? Here are all these people suffering terribly from the results of unwanted fertility. And that kind of gets completely lost. Here's some woman who didn't get to be the person she wanted to be.
So how do you want to get love into the pro-choice side? I stand corrected. I don't want to add personhood to videos, but you were the one who was saying, the right wing has somehow played the love card.
Yes.
Gay rights people have played the love card, and I hear you suggesting that maybe the pro-abortion, because that's what you want to call us, rather than pro-choice, no?
No, I'm with pro-choice.
Okay, pro-choice.
I'm with pro-choice.
So the pro-choice camp should somehow, what should our arguments be? And this is really my last question.
Okay.
I want to open up to the room.
Okay.
What should we do?
Okay, I would say, there's a new, well, it's not so new, but there's another way of talking about abortion than choice. And that is reproductive justice. And I think that can help us out of this quandary that you so elegantly posed, which is reproductive justice says, okay, choice is not enough. Choice, like anti-choice, it ends when you're born, or it ends with the decision to have the baby, not to have the baby, and that it gives you that right. But it doesn't, we need to put this decision in a larger context. We need to ask not only, well, what do women need to have only the children that they want to have, but also, what is the context of raising children in this society? What about, giving families, mothers, children, what they need to flourish? We need to talk more about that. I think that's really important, and that might be the key.
But you know what, I wrote a book called Mother Feminist, which makes exactly this argument. It's a whole book about how Polish society has abandoned mothers, and about the psychological but also economic and logistic issues that women deal with. There's one tiny chapter in it about abortion. And I know a lot of conservative women who loved my book. And they said, except for that, why did you give up on the abortion thing? Let's increase healthcare, let's increase childcare, let's give women the psychological support they need. Let's give them flexi hours, and all sorts of solutions that I'm discussing and wondering about, and let's force men to do the housework.
Oh, yeah.
All those good things. But abortion, no, I can't deal with that, say my conservative friends. So they're willing to deal with reproductive justice as long as there's no abortion.
Except they're not. Except then they go vote for people who don't do anything for reproductive justice. In the United States, there are plenty of people who say, yes, we've got to take better care of mothers and children. But what do? They vote Republican, and the Republican Party is just cut everything. And when they do these anti-choice, mother-friendly people, when they do make a proposal, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. It's, oh, well, we need to give women some more food stamps. Or we need to have more battered women's shelters. I mean, it's just pathetic. Nobody thinks, we have yet to have a dialogue about what does a woman really need to raise a child well. It would be very expensive. What does a woman need to raise a child well and keep her job? You see, that's another bit that they never really get to. It's always, how do we get them back into the home, but we'll make the home kind of nice. But they never do any of this. And in fact, in Poland, where they keep promising to do these things, even women's health care is pathetic. I have read, it's in my book, I have read that Poland has the highest rate of cervical cancer in all of Europe. Cervical cancer is a very curable disease. It is fatal if you don't cure it, and it's mostly found in poor countries where women's status is very low, poor third world countries, except in Poland. Well, the test for cervical cancer is very cheap, but they don't bother. Why should they do that? In Poland, they care so much about maternity that you have to pay for anesthesia if you want it. Well, you
not anymore. That has actually changed.
So they
There's
did
a
that.
footnote now.
They decided not to have rows and rows of screaming women giving birth. I mean, really, it's pathetic. What I would say is, okay, why don't you try it? Do some nice things for women and see what happens. The truth is, being a mother is a very big job. It's huge. And it is natural for women to want to do this thing when they're in a good place to do it.
But they still shouldn't be forced.
They still should not be forced. No, you can't force people to do this. It would be as if you forced men to say, okay, if your girlfriend has a baby, you have to take care of it. How do you think that would go over? We wouldn't see that. I mean, there are this handful of men who say, yeah, of course I want a baby. She shouldn't be able to have an abortion. Most men would not be happy if they were the sole parent of a baby, that they didn't have any role in deciding that, it was a mistake, it was an accidental pregnancy. Women are just left holding the bag. This is completely unfair.
Well, I wanted to push the strategy question because you've evaded the question of how are we going to insert love into the debate.
No, I don't think I did evade it. I think reproductive justice is the
You think it's about love?
I do.
What about gruesome cases? I think you were told by some of my Polish friends about the Chazan case and the woman who was forced to have a baby who died within a few days after childbirth. This was a very public story, which I think made a lot of people stop and think about abortion and about the real, the level of cruelty which is really implicit in those loving defenders of life. On the other hand, it made me also wonder, why aren't we able to protect with equal fire, with equal conviction, the right of a woman to have an abortion who isn't in such a horrible situation? So would you support a strategy that actually involves corpses and gruesome images and showing the cruelty of the so-called pro-lifers? Do you think that's an alley that we should be pursuing? It's the early women's movement did it. I mean, the main tool, propaganda tool, maybe I shouldn't be using that word, the main tool of persuasion in getting Roe versus Wade passed in popular culture and in the media were images of women who died on tables, on the kitchen table image. There's one image that is still in my mind because I've seen it in so many places. And I don't think these are very readily available now because, at least in Poland, the abortion underground is fairly civilized. It has this effect of shaming women, it's humiliating, it's costly, but it usually isn't done with a dirty kitchen knife, right? But we could get some awful images, and the Hazan case, I think, was one, right? Like I think you could use images of that baby that was born, right? And the suffering woman, and the I don't know, the really horrible things. Do you think that we should counter the gruesomeness of the anti-abortion people with strong imagery on our side? Because they go as far as they can. Yeah. There have been dozens of exhibitions on the street where little children can see them in churches. I think even in schools that are echoes of the silent scream, but even worse, because now they're beautiful color and so on. And how would you imagine a successful pro-choice movement?
Well, it's fascinating. You're the second. I've done 3 interviews this afternoon with different papers, and you're the second person who's asked about this image thing. So maybe this is, I don't know, it's a Polish thing. I would say in the United States, the fetus pictures, and that we also have trucks that go around certain neighborhoods and with the bloody fetus pictures. I get them in my email all the time. I don't think that they're successful. I think it might be completely different in Poland, but in America, it just seems very impolite, very bad form to do this. And I think it reminds people, oh God, these people are fanatics. So I don't think it's a good strategy from their perspective. If I were in the anti-choice movement, I would be saying, let's not show the bloody fetus pictures. I would say that the winning strategy for the pro-choice movement is for actual, real, living women to come forward and talk about their experiences in a truthful way. And that's happening. And that's what's really, really great. I see my book, which is basically about that, which is basically saying, look, women, put yourselves at the center of this experience. Don't let the fetus get all the limelight here. And I'm happy to say that I think my book is part of a wave of awakening of women, especially younger women, who are much more upfront about abortion as part of their lives than women.
We had a screening actually at Katha Pollitt some time ago of Jennifer Baumgartner's.
Yes, I Had an Abortion.
I Had an Abortion. It's a wonderful film, and I've shown it in classes and in discussions about abortion, and it does have a way of changing people's minds. Not through images of fetuses, but through women telling stories.
Yes, I think abortion storytelling is really important, and even things like on Twitter. How many of you are on Twitter, by the way? Twitter, a Polish thing? I'm kind of always on Twitter. So there's a hashtag called Shout Your Abortion that 2 young women started. Thousands of women have gone on Twitter to say, I had an abortion and it made my happy life possible. I had an abortion and I've never regretted it. All like that. It's real, and then of course the anti-choicers got into it with "Shout Your Murder." So I think that, at least in the American context, the people who go too far are the anti-choicers. They're the ones who expect us to believe that 1 in 3 American women is a murderer. And this is ridiculous. America takes infanticide very seriously. If you kill your baby, you go to jail for a long time. You're lucky if you don't end up on death row. So it's not as if people say, oh yeah, murder, we don't care. It's that it's very, very hard to believe that abortion is murder. So when they talk like this, they put themselves, I think, outside the mainstream.
Well, Polish society may be further gone than that, but I'm happy we can end on an optimistic note.
Yes.
I welcome questions or comments. And please introduce yourself, okay? Because we're recording this.
Hello, I'm Karolina Mińskiewicz. I'm from the Federation for Women and Family Planning, and I wanted to comment on this part of your conversation about love, not love, and I always am open to new ways of talking about abortion, pro-choice, and I think that it's not the way to go, because for two reasons that came to my mind just now. I might come up with some more. But first of all, we would have to make a presumption that a woman who decides about carrying her pregnancy to term does it because of this love that is growing inside of her towards this embryo fetus and the baby, if she decides to call it. And thus, I don't think that we can make that presumption that we have proves that it happens this way. And actually, I think it doesn't happen this way. So that's one of the reasons. And another one is I think it's dangerous, because if we draw this line between those who have abortions and those who decide not to have it, and this line is love, I think it's kind of an argument for the anti-choicers. And it kind of pushes women into that stereotypical view of women who are designed to have babies, who should want to have babies, who should always accept the fact that if they get pregnant, they have to give birth, and that it's, you know, that those women who do not have those feelings toward fetuses that are that they conceive are bad women, are evil women, and that can really end up in an argument that all women who are not capable of loving children, you know, get abortions. And I think that's very dangerous, because it is still like maybe even strengthening that myth about abortion that, you know, those evil abortionists, feminists, or whoever, you know, have abortions because they are cold, because they are not good women, good enough women who should, because a woman, a true woman should have, you know, positive feelings about her pregnancy, because that's her role in society, in life. So that would be my comment about that, and I really would not go down that path, because I think it's quite dangerous, and it can even strengthen those myths about abortion that we want to get rid of. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that the abortion is love was not my idea. I was quoting an Irish journalist, Anthony McTiernan, who's quite wonderful. It was just something I was thinking about. But I basically agree, look, if you're going to have an abortion, maybe you don't feel love. Maybe you're not doing it because, oh, I want to be a mother, but not now. Maybe you never want to be a mother. That's okay.
However, the argument that a lot of women have abortions because they have kids and they know they can't afford another one and they love the ones they have is an important one. And I think, always in the back of my mind, there's Alicja Tysiąc. Not necessarily Alicja Tysiąc from the time she was, you know, going through the ordeal, but Alicja Tysiąc facing hostile journalists who were telling her, you should not have this child. And Julka was waiting for her in the studio. And Alicja has been brilliant at raising this child, feeling fully loved, and understanding that when she was pregnant, she had the right and she also wanted to have an abortion, but once the child was born, she's her daughter and she is loved. So basically, I would say, you know, it's complicated and it changes, and you're not the same person in different times of your life, but as long as you're pregnant, you should have the choice, right?
So exactly on this subject, my name is Elżbieta Korolczuk and I'm a sociologist but also feminist activist. And I actually understood this idea quite differently from what you said, because I was thinking rather in the vein that Agnieszka presented, that talking about love is something that helps us to understand that, first of all, having an abortion is not a stigma, is not your identity that you should carry along with, you know, through all your life. That it's processual, that you can actually think about it and then decide otherwise, and you can, or be denied abortion and you can still love the child or not. I mean, this is not something that is destined from the beginning, that there is one path that everyone goes. And in that sense, talking about women who actually have children and love those children, but decide in the case of the next pregnancy to go with abortion, is something to sort of dismantle this idea that only, you know, hard, cold, unloving bitches have abortions, because that's nonsense. What I was thinking about to actually, I'm not sure if I have a question about that, but I certainly have a comment. Because I think that the one thing that we don't talk so much, I mean, maybe you discuss it in a book they haven't read yet, unfortunately, is the history of maternity policies, reproductive policies, which were very often connected to ideas of good motherhood, questions about who should and who shouldn't have children, and so on and so forth. Of course, we can, I mean, in some countries it was really the case of women's movements being very successful in bringing in the idea that women should have a choice. But in many contexts, it was about the right to have an abortion, for example, was connected to eugenic thinking. Like in Sweden, for example, where the abortion were introduced firstly as a way to control the population. And this is something which I guess haunts us all the time, which actually comes back in today's anti-abortion propaganda, that this is actually a way to, a part of a big scheme to control world's population.
There is an interesting argument about this in the book, and a kind of defense of Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, so in that sense, I think that the problem that we still have is that in many contexts, there are those groups which actually think about groups who should have the right to abortion in eugenic terms, sorry. And in that sense, it's something that sort of creates a backlash on the whole idea of women, on the fact that women should have a choice. The question is how to handle it and how to face the past. And maybe you were discussing it, as I understand, in the book, but I haven't read it yet.
What you say is very interesting. It's an argument that's usually made about birth control. Margaret Sanger, who said eugenic things in the 20s and 30s, she was against abortion at that time. Yeah.
I don't think
So,
that's Swedish, actually.
Yeah, well, I don't know a lot about Sweden, but one thing I do know about Sweden, which gets back to this discussion about shouldn't we have, would abortion, a way of fighting abortion by giving more social help to women and children. Sweden does a very good job of that. They have an abortion rate that's like the United States. I do think the bottom line is being a mother is really a big deal, and it has something, if you're very, very poor and you want to have a baby, social help might help you have that baby, but people want small families. They just do. In the modern world, people don't want to have 5 children. They don't want to start having children when they're 16 years old. And they don't want to have, mostly they don't want to have babies when they're 45-year-olds either. And I just think that abortion is always going to be a part of women's experience. And the only thing that is really going to make a difference in lowering the number of abortions is better birth control. And I don't know what they're doing in Sweden, but apparently they're not using the right methods. But getting on to this eugenics thing, I think that in the United States, that argument, maybe Poland is different. In the United States, the argument is often made by anti-choicers that abortion is racist. There were billboards that said the most dangerous place for an African American child is the womb. There was another that said, African American children, an endangered species. It's kind of wild. But anyway, so what are they saying when they say that? They're saying, yeah, the people who are responsible for the reason the most dangerous place for an African American child is the womb is because of black women. Abortion has been compared to slavery. So what that is the black woman is like a slave owner, her body is like a plantation, and what? The embryo is in there doing work doing work that she profits from? She can sell her embryo to some other slave-owning black woman? It's crazy. It's the ultimate erasure of black women. And black women are furious at this line of this whole argument. Because behind it is the idea, you don't want to have an abortion, but somehow Planned Parenthood magically lures you in to its doors and gives you an abortion you don't want. Well, this isn't what happens. You want the abortion, you call up Planned Parenthood, you make the appointment, you show up, they give you counseling. If you still want the abortion, they give you an abortion. So I don't see that eugenics is relevant in the American context at all.
Yeah, but it does work as an argument, not only within the United States, the argument abortion is racist, but also in a broader campaign against gender equality, gender ideology, and human rights of women. The efforts to defund Planned Parenthood and other UN agencies in the third world, for instance, right? There is this. One of the policies is to prevent the United States from funding anything that includes abortion.
Yes.
And the argument here is that the evil aspect of the United States, the kind of left-wingers in the state, they want to kill black babies in Africa. But I think these are crazy arguments of the anti-abortions that we should examine them, see for what they are, but you cannot really respond to them because they're based on a paranoid vision of the world. But we're working on it with Elżbieta, actually. We'll find a solution to this one sooner or later. Want the mic?
Hi, my name is Rua, and I'm doing I come from Syria, and maybe I just want to make some comment on the situation in there. I'm doing my master's studies in women's and gender studies. In Syria, actually, abortion is. Syria has the highest percentage of populations are Muslims. So in Islam, it's not illegal to have abortion up to 40 days. In some sects, actually, it is up to 20 days. And that's the time when they think that the baby will have a soul. And about this love and emotional relationship between the mother and the fetus or the child, I kind of not agreeing on taking this turn because now that we have a war, there are two different trends about children. Those who refuse to have children because the word is not good enough. And it is obviously the child will not have a good future, and those who actually have more children because they feel threatened. And it is the instinct to survive and to reproduce. So I don't see where the connection, the emotional connection. The first ones also could be having this love relationship with the imaginary children, about not really bringing them here to suffer and all this stuff. But my question, and I have maybe it's a bit stupid question, but also, do you think that there is a relation between abortion and restricting abortion and the nation's idea? The idea of the nation? And also about economy and capitalism, because I think, I don't know, I really know so little about abortion, but I think it's more like we're focusing a lot about the relationship between the mother and the child, but also we could take it to a broader perspective and then see how it works for nations.
Yeah.
The idea of the nations, and also within this capitalist system.
Yeah, this is a fascinating question which we haven't talked about so far, which is exactly this: how does abortion fit into nationalism? So in America, abortion, a lot of people don't know this, especially in America. Abortion was legal until after the Civil War. Except in 2 states. where it continued to flourish, New York and Connecticut. But it was legal, at least until quickening, which is when the mother feels the baby move, like in around the 4th or 5th month. Then in the 1870s, it was made illegal in state after state after state, along with the criminalization of birth control and information about birth control, which could no longer be sent through the mails. So what was going on there? Well, a number of things were going on. One was that doctors were trying to get control of childbirth and all that from midwives, and midwives were performing abortions. Doctors too, but they didn't talk about that. But the one big thing was that who was having abortions were native-born Yankee women, white women. And at that time, a lot of immigrants were coming in from Ireland and Italy and Eastern Europe, Southern Europe too. And Jews were coming in, and there was a great fear, we, the real Americans, are being outbred by these newcomers. So we have to have more people, more white people, and women aren't doing their job, because women, for their part, were beginning to get out of the house a little bit. They were trying to have more of a life in society. There was a feminist movement. Teddy Roosevelt, a very important American president who's much admired and beloved, he gave a famous speech in 1905 where he talked about race suicide. And he didn't mean just white people there. He meant more like, well, maybe he did, actually. I'm not sure what he meant. But he's...
In 1905,
yeah.
Jews were also...
Yeah. He meant... And he talked about, women have to have kids, and this is the noblest thing you can do. It's very important. Anyone who doesn't have kids, they're just rejecting their duty, their patriotic American duty. So this was a very important thing. It was really about, we want more people of the kind of people we want. And you see this in Poland, too, with the whole idea of demographic winter. It's the same thing. So I think, yes, it's very important, and that the women, it's like women are this natural resource. It's really disturbing.
If I may just send your way some references. The most important book on gendered nationalism, Nira Yuval Davis's Gender and Nation, I think it has a chapter on abortion. And I'll be happy to send you articles. I worked on this. I observed how the rise of nationalism in Poland, the first wave of peace, 2007 and around, coincided, or actually was part and parcel of a revival of very strong anti-abortion wishes, including a very strong connection between Poland joining the EU and Poland making its anti-abortion laws stricter. In fact, if you read the Polish EU accession documents, there is a special clause which they added at the last moment in negotiations, which says the European Union shall not limit our rights on matters of life and death and morality. And that was completely unnecessary, by the way, from a practical point of view, because the acquis communautaire does not include abortion. That was something that the European Union has given up on for various political reasons. But they added it in as a matter of national pride. In other words, Poland's national pride at the time of accession was invested into banning abortion. There were all these symbolic moments of, vows by right-wing nationalist politicians made to the Virgin Mary, Queen of Poland, that we shall do everything to prevent abortion. There's a very strong connection, and there's lots of really interesting stuff written about it. But I was really, I'm grateful to you for bringing up this war context, because of course war is the most extreme situation in which people make these decisions. And so what you said was really fascinating. War is also a situation, and this happened in the Balkans, where women are impregnated by the enemy. And interestingly, the pro-lifers have a very different attitude towards those abortions, right? So if the baby is not ours, but it's the enemy's, then abortions are fine. It's complicated, but there's a lot of literature on this, and of course it's not about love, it's about power, right? And it's about the boundaries of the nation.
There was also, it's really interesting what happens in various countries when women on waves arrive. And one of the things that happened in Poland was that the neo-Nazis who were countering the women on waves, what was this, 2003? 4, they were saying, kill your Dutch babies, but not our Polish babies. And so much for the universality of life, right? So there's a very strong and very interesting connection, and if we exchange emails, I'll be happy to send you stuff.
In this vein, because I was thinking also about Janine Holt's piece on the abortion debate in Poland, and she shows that it's also about constructing new citizens. So in a sense, the new legislation introduced the new category of a citizen, which she calls fetal citizen, which is given certain rights. And then, of course, the question is how to use it politically, because obviously those politicians become representatives for this new group of discursively constructed citizens. And this is now extended to fertilized eggs, which are used in vitro procedures, and so on and so forth. So this trend towards constructing new forms of citizenship also allows the politicians to have someone that they can actually govern, because they are so obviously voiceless.
Yeah.
And Holt shows it very beautifully. She says there are this kind of process of democratic consolidation needs ideal citizens who would be ideally governed by the politicians, and in that sense you have a lot of categories of very stubborn and very difficult to govern citizens, like, for example, unionists, feminists, and others. And here come those
the embryos
as ideal
represented
citizens.
by Jarosław Gowin.
Exactly. So that's a very politicized process.
There's a fascinating chapter actually about embryo fetal citizenship in this book. And there's one fascinating difference, which I guess we won't really have time to discuss, but let me just throw this in. It's a fascinating book. Apparently in the United States there's this movement for adoption of frozen embryos.
Snowflake babies.
Snowflake babies, they are, yeah, and I didn't know about this, and I haven't researched this, but I've been reading around, and my feeling is that in Poland this is unthinkable. Nobody would give up their snowflake to some other woman. And the idea is that there's this fantasy going on, and maybe this has changed since I looked on those fora, but the idea was that if you allow another woman to adopt your mrozaczek, which is the tender word for the snowflake baby, then what happens is that she will have the baby, you will have another baby, they will meet, they will marry, and it's incest.
That could happen.
And so in Poland, adoption of embryos is actually a very stigmatized thing, and to the detriment of a lot of infertile couples who could benefit from it. But it doesn't happen often, and it's stigmatized, I think. And a lot of women, I've actually had these conversations with women who tell me that they have, 16 embryos in the freezer, but they would never give them up. And I'm like, well, it's too bad. There are all these women who can't have babies, and maybe they would want them.
So they don't really believe that those frozen embryos.
No, but they're
are
pro-choice
children,
women.
because they wouldn't want them to be in a refrigerator if they were really children. Well, in the United States, it is a little different. There is this, if you want to adopt a frozen embryo, there are people who will. I mean, not everybody by any means, but there are people that abandon their frozen embryos, say we have no more further interest in this. And there are some who will say, yes, I want this frozen embryo. Yeah, fine, you can have it. We're very generous people in the United States. So it's really weird. But as I talk about in the book, if they really believe that these frozen embryos were children, there would be a mass, they're abandoned, frozen, cold little children, it's
500,000 of them?
there are 500,000 of them, there may be more by now. Ever more children in frozen, there would be a mass movement saying, we've got to get these kids adopted, come on. And every pastor in his evangelical fundamentalist church would say, come on, women of the congregation, you owe it to these frozen children to adopt one and to have one of these babies. They don't do anything like that. It's just like adopting foster children. They might say, that's a nice thing to do, but they don't really push it. So I feel again that this is where it's all nonsense. It is just all nonsense. They don't believe this. They just have to say they do.
Okay, and we have to say what it's like to be a woman in a country where abortion is banned, and I hope this will happen more in Poland, because there haven't been that many abortion coming out, and that's, I think, a big problem of the movement. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Katha Pollitt. And,
Thank you all for coming.
Great work.
Oh,